Okay. Hello all, thanks for being here. Today is the second Think Open Rovereto Symposium for the year 2023. That's why it's TORS 2023-02. Title of this symposium is Multicenter Studies, and today two speakers from the international community will introduce the topic, enlightening specific angles, including design, implementation and relevance, and also many other technical and scientific features related to this specific way of approaching the construction of scientific knowledge. We also have, we will also attend a specific discussion related on the clinical implication of this approach. Please, this is a very, we are very few people, or let's say a reasonable amount of people in the attendance. So let's, if the speakers are okay with this, I'll try to keep this informal. If you want, use the Zoom capabilities to virtually raise your hand, or just type your questions in the chat. We'll have dedicated question and answer sessions at the end of each talk, and a generic discussion panel at the end of the two talks. So with that said, I think we could proceed to the first speech by Giulia Calignano. She's a postdoc, researcher at DPSS, the University of Padova, investigating language acquisition and cognitive development. She has a PhD in cognitive science from the Department of Psychology and Cognitive Science, DIPSCO, here at the University of Trento, under the guidance of Professor Vespignani. Her research interests encompass investigating the interplay between attention and language through behavioral, eye-tracking, neurophysiological measures, for example, electroencephalography and pupillometry, modeled by taking advantage of nonlinear mixed effects models and multiverse approach to data reprocessing. She's also a member of the Baby Lab of DPSS, member of Psychostats, that has been recently awarded of a psychological science mission award by the Society of Improvement of Psychological Science. So I would leave the floor to Giulia, and again, we can have questions within the talk, but we will also have a dedicated session at the end of this first speech. Giulia?
Thank you very much, Vittorio, for this nice introduction. So I'm more than happy to be here talking about multicenter, and I'm not here to teach anything. The very aim of my presence today is just sharing my experience so far and hoping to create with you new visions of collaborative science. So yeah, the contents of this short presentation basically will cover these 3 points and plus the reference. So why it's worth it to participate in collaborative studies, the different challenges but same aims of different kind of multicenter studies, and the specific challenges and opportunities for early career researchers, because I'm an early career researcher, so this is my point of view from this hierarchical point. So why participating in collaborative studies? In my case, was during my first year of PhD, spent at University of Trento, and I was like Alice in Wonderland, trying to figure out sounding theories of language acquisition and cognitive development. Chambers was spreading the word of pre-registration during that time, and I got fascinated by it, as many of you, I suppose. And specifically in 2017, this work by a collaborative group of developmental psychologists published this manifesto, let's say, of the collaborative approach to infant research, because I'm interested in the cognitive development in general and infancy research. And so this was the very first step in my field that moves toward this idea of collaborative projects, studies in infancy research, because as you may know, in this field, sample size are very small. The population is a hard to reach population, and you cannot oblige or give instruction to infants. So it's very common to have small sample size for several reasons. Then, as you can see in this plot here, taken from the paper, in this case is the effect size of the preference of infants towards speech, human speech. And as you can see here, the variability, the uncertainty, and the error around the correct estimation of the plausible effect size is very large. So this group of authors found very important to have a collaborative approach to science, especially in this field. And I got fascinated by it. Also for, let's say, existential problems and methodological questions and issues. So first of all, are our studies useless? Citing Lacan's 2023, that is, makes sense to, does make sense to run small studies that lead to unthoughtful conclusion, or at least partial conclusion, when we can collaborate and have large studies, so making the efforts of everybody more useful. And also a philosophical question, personal question: is my action, everyday action, useful, or I'm just feeding the beast of the system? So I really enjoy this idea of moving from being Batman to be Robin, so from being a hero to be a worker, so a little hunt, and try to collaborate with other people. So in 2017, I started my experience in research as a PhD student, coordinating and collaborating in single lab studies, as all of us, so working in a laboratory, especially in empirical studies within the infancy research field. And I started also collaborating in 2 lab studies, so with laboratories in Padova, in Milano, in Trento. And let's say that that they can be taught as multicenter studies in a small size, but they were my first experience, and I found it very interesting to have more discussion and to see other procedures out from my laboratory. But since 2019, I participated in bigger multi-center studies. First of all, a multi-method analysis, multi-laboratory study in which 7 laboratories across the world collaborate to reanalyze independently a dataset coming from a study on goal attribution in infants collected in Canada. So we all the 7 labs were blinded, and we ran our analysis. Specifically, I implemented my multiverse approach to preprocessing of pupillometry, and now it's going to be published. And the aim of in this case was to check the robustness of the results independent from the specific analytic procedure. Then I'm participating now in a spin-off of the hackathon and conference SIPS. I don't know if you know the Society of Improvement of Psychological Science. Their conference are unconventional conference in which we actually work together in a collaborative fashion. And this spin-off is more about meta science, so trying collaboratively to give indication, the guidelines on how to pre-register a study, things to do and to don't, things not to do for beginners. So to increase the participation and appealing of the pre-registration in general for early career researchers. Then I'm a co-author of the Many Babies 5. I don't know if you know, here you can see all the laboratories participating in the work in the Many Babies 5 that's currently under review, and it's an empirical study. And we basically now the registered report is under review. And we collaborate during the last 2 years, meeting basically each month to decide all the aspects of the study. Also, I'm involved in Many Babies 2, pupillometry, a spin-off that in this case aims at reanalyze secondary data that are not analyzed, not taken in consideration in Many Babies 2 original. So yeah, so the aim of this collaborative study is more empirical and methodological. And finally, as an independent reviewer, I'm collaborating with the framework for open and reproducible research training, the FORT, you maybe know it. So different challenges for this during this pathways and this collaboration, different collaboration then, but same aims. And now I hope not to be too boring, but I would like to go to show you my experience across a number of issues or challenges or that all projects should face at certain points, also single lab. And let's start with the authorship problem. So in my experience, so I'm not here again to teach anything. I'm just here to share my experience. So in my experience of single lab studies, the algorithm to decide the authorship is semi-mysterious, as you may know. Yeah, it's hard to make jokes without anybody laughing because you are all the camera off, but it's okay. And when I had my experience in 2 or 3 laboratory projects was basically very similar to the single lab experience, but in this case, early career were always put first. In the multi-method analysis, so the multi-method analysis on pupillometry, it was led by Sylvain Sirab of the Quebec University. The data collection was carried out by the team leader in Canada, and then the co-author selection of the authors, included me, was the main parameter was to select a variety of methods, in my case, the multiverse approach, and the co-authors are ordered in alphabetical order, and together with the credit, you may know, the credit way to assess authorships and to actually define and make it explicit what each author contributes to in a project. And this project, as I said, is now finally in press after 2-year work. Then authorship in the meta-science multi-collaborative project, the SIPS spin-off hackathon, is still under discussion because we started collaborating to these guidelines of do and don'ts thing in the registration process, and many people are agitating now. So we are actually under this. We are discussing which may be the better parameters, the better criteria to decide who will be author and why. So this is, I would like to discuss more later, maybe with you, which are the shades of this discussion, because authorship is not so obvious sometimes. In the Many Babies 5, of course, there is always a team leader that proposes the project to the community, usually a replication of traditional studies, classical studies, and during the process, so from the very beginning and during the whole collaborative project, we have several moments of that monitor us our actual contribution. So the order may change from the start to the end of the project. Otherwise, the alphabetical order is the main criterion. Same for the many babies too. Basically, they share a lot of rules. And finally, I first applied as to collaborate in this project from the Fort that was about how to boost the open science culture in those countries that are developing countries. And I propose myself as representing developing countries in this sense, even if Italy is not categorized as such, because I thought that so far open science is not so rewarded in Italy, but they of course required all the authors to belong to the developing country, so asked me to just be a reviewer of the project. So about the workflow management, usually in single lab study, I don't know if it's your experience too, but early careers researchers build the experiment, collect data, and write a paper. That's not the case for the collaborative studies, in which, for example, in the multi-method, multi-lab analysis, each laboratory write a method section, the result section, and the discussion section. So that was required because we were analyzing data in blind condition, let's say, to assess the robustness of the results. The workflow management so far for the spin-off of the SIPS hackathon is require us to meet each month, and they are operative meetings. They last just 1 hour. We have a call, and we try to get things done by the end of the meeting. And mainly we communicate by emails. And so far we are operationalizing the goals in sub-goals, so in sub-tasks, in which we create subgroups based on expertise and inclusion criteria. That means that hierarchy plays no role here. Truly, maybe this is the project in which hierarchy really does not play any role. And then Many Babies 5 also we so far is under review, so we are awaiting the revisions, but we met the last 2 years each month, with in which we first discussed the rationale of the study, then we decided and build the stimuli, and the stimuli and the procedure part took like a whole summer of meetings, more intensive meetings. There were subtask assignments, and always with the same criteria of select subgroups based both on expertise and inclusion. So yeah, so early career researchers, but also undergraduate students are very welcome in this kind of projects. The Many Babies 2 was pupillometry spin-off was basically very similar to Many Babies 5, and it has the this collaboration among a collaborative project, because this collaborative project basically is communicate with the Many Babies 2 original, so not the spin-off, the original study. So it's a collaboration among collaborative projects, and so it reminds me to the multiverse approach to data in general and to collaboration. Yeah. So what about the open tools? In my experience, I always prefer, also in my single lab studies, to use open tools. So R to data management and analysis, Open Sesame to run my experiment, of course Zoom, online meetings, and OSF to store and share data and materials. But also, so these tools mainly are used in both single lab and multi-method analysis, my experience. With the with the collaborative experience, I also use other kind of open tools, like, for example, we use a lot Google Doc. In this project, in this multi-method analysis, we basically use just Google Doc and R. In the SIPS hackathon, we make extensive use of ChatGPT, for example, to summary our meetings, to summary, because, and it is very useful because it allows you to sum up and to track a lot of information that otherwise required work time for us so it's very useful for this kind of tasks. And the EdDoc, that is a new tool that I discovered just yesterday in a meeting for the collaborative project. That is a new tool that it's basically does the same work of Google Doc, sharing Google Doc, but it's just more code friendly, and it looks like error markdown online, if you are familiar with that, but we can talk about error markdown also later if you have questions. We are going to create a Shiny app in this hackathon, so people, so we are actually discussing what is better, what outcome is better for this project. And we thought that given that there are many resources out there talking about pre-registration, how to do it, etc., we decide to, we are trying to put together all the resources out there and to create a Shiny app that easily guides early or the researcher in general to find out which resources are more suitable for the project, his or her project aims. In Many Babies 5, I wrote down flexibility and inclusion because the rules are less strict in this project, in the Many Babies 5, because we have to, the main goal is to get involved, to involve a great number of laboratories across the world. So each laboratory for different reason has different procedures or resources. So all these will be taken into account in the model that in the statistical model that we pre-registered. So with slope random for laboratories and slope random for the specific tool for, in this case, of eye tracking. So yeah, it's in order to get a good amount of data from all the laboratories that wants to participate in this big project, the inclusion criteria and the procedures and the open tools used are very flexible. Yeah. So what about the procedure? So the actual work during to carry out a study. In the single lab experience, the main motto for me has always been rush or you will die. So no matter what you are going to do, the important thing is to publish. It's not the same while collaborating in these large multi-center studies. Specifically in the multi-method analysis, the multi-lab multi-method analysis study, it was very useful for example, to run analysis that all laboratories run analysis blinded, because we actually were able to find a lot of errors in the dataset, and this increased the robustness and replicability of our work. So and also each aspect of the study, of the data collection, could be openly discussed, but this discussion at a deadline. That is, even if it seems like you have a lot of things to discuss with many people, the nice thing that everybody usually agree to have a deadline, and so to have a moment in which we should decide what to do and to accept in a way uncertainty and arbitrary. And so also a quote, a lot of degrees of freedom in our decision. In this SIPS spin-off, that is, as you now you know, is about meta science, so rules about how to get things done according to open science guidelines. The main procedures is interdisciplinary discussion. So we are philosophers, cognitive scientists, and statisticians. And so it is a real flourishing experience, because each goal have to be defined very well according to the different perspectives, so a very interdisciplinary approach. In Many Babies 5, we are now, as I already told you, we are now awaiting the revision of the registered report, and the harder part so far will be to get all the ethical approval from all the laboratories that are participating in this study, this project. So this is a bureaucratic part that will probably slow down the data collection, because, as you know, even if ethics should be universal, we have several ethical committees, each one with different rules and applications. Yeah, and for the Many Babies 2, we are now working on the registered report of secondary data, as I told you. So we are now meeting to discuss which models and how to approach to data preprocessing. So it's really a methodological project. So challenges and opportunities for early career researchers. I will leave you with these last two romantic slides, let's say. So costs for early careers, researcher, of course, from my point of view, so it's not an absolute point of view, but it's what I learned. First of all, it's time consuming, because you have meetings, that is extra meetings, not just the meetings with your laboratory and your colleagues, extra meetings with several people, and sometimes not all people can be there, so we arrange more than one meeting in a month, for example. So, and extra work, of course. Yeah, at the end of the day, when you work and you collaborate multi-laboratory, multi-center studies, you get low ratings during your career progression, at least in my experience and at least in Italy. There are basically no incentives. And the worst thing is maybe that it's not perceived as a work of excellence, but is perceived below a single laboratory study. It makes no sense in scientific terms, but in the real world, it seems that is the case. And it requires, of course, collaborating in this project with such an amount of interdisciplinary and different skills and competencies required as to a continuous training on how to make our data study reproducible, our results replicable, and our data and materials readable. So this time require these skills require training, and training requires time, and so this increases the unfair competition to the actual publish or perish real world. But of course, you get something good. I prefer to think about what I get in positive terms. You get a trust in science and in humanity that I think it's quite important during this period of crisis, and you feel to overlap more with the ethical principle of a universalism of Morton. So no matter who you are, if you are going to say something that makes sense, you will be heard. In academia, it's not always like that, at least in my opinion. And also titles and authority matter less, because it's everyday working and it's building together a project. So trust and credibility are earned by actively contributing, including criticism that is very incentivized in this at least in my experience in this collaboration. Also, I learned that it's impossible to keep up with everyone's pace. So it's important to have rules with the right amount of flexibility. So if you want to get the things done, somebody will be left behind, and somebody, or in the other case, we will wait for somebody if we think that its contribution is fundamental. So in a way, a dream becomes a plan with a date. So it's very good it's very inspirational to participate to this, or to start thinking to carry out these multi-center studies. But then we should fix some very clear rules. And I think this is a very good advice for life in general. Also, it's very clear working with different experts around the world that errors are inevitable. So whoever says that never makes error is lying, of course. And every error found is gold, because it qualifies all the time spent working on this project. So it's an incremental perspective. We are looking for errors in order to really estimate the uncertainty and the of our complementary uncertainty of our results. Finally, the inclusion and accessibility, because it's very horizontal an horizontal place, or the collaboration does not really needs everybody, undergrad students to professor, and all the expertise, all the experience helps a lot. So if you are an undergrad student, think about collaborating with a collaborative, participating in a collaborative project. Because it helps you to embrace uncertainty, so to increase your tolerance to uncertainty. And also it's a continuous learning and a sharing of vision. You are not alone, you belong to a community, and you can really touch it. So yeah, I finished my presentation. I have the reference here. I can give you the slide if you want, if you find it useful. And that's it. Thank you. So now it's time for discussion, and hope you ask questions.
Thank you, Giulia. I would, I don't know if you want, okay, let's see, maybe you can reshare the screen if it's needed for questions. And so the discussion is open. I don't know if people from the attendance want to ask something to our speaker. I have already many doubts and potential questions, but I leave the floor to other people for now. You can also use the chat if you don't want to appear in video. Alessandra, please.
Yeah, may I ask a question, Giulia? Thank you very much for the presentation. It was nice to see, some challenges that we faced as well in our project. So you discussed them, and I was reading the slide and say, okay, yeah, I know this, I know that. So it was really nice. And one of the point was about the recurring meetings together with the other, say, members of the team or the collaborative project. And actually, this is a very practical question. I was quite curious about the use of ChatGPT in meetings. So how do you use it?
Yeah, so basically, if you, I don't know with other platform, but in Zoom, you can download and transcribe all the conversation. So during the meeting, so it gives you a TXT file with all the time and the person who speaks and what he said, or at least the guess of what he get, from the speech. And so you have this file, this text file, and you give it to ChatGPT and ask him, like, please, can you summarize the main goal, the disagreement, or whatever. I mean, you can ask ChatGPT whatever you like. And if it's not too long, because by the way, you usually in an hour meeting, ChatGPT is able to process the text produced, the speech produced in a 1 hour meeting. And yeah, it basically gives you a good resume, and so you don't have to, and then you have just, of course, you have to editing it, because ChatGPT sometimes make mistakes, and also the transcription of Zoom make mistakes, especially, given that I'm Italian, I have my accent, and everybody from other places have their accents, so sometimes the transcription is not perfect, but it's more easier to edit a text than to write it from scratch. So yeah, I suggest to use it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I would just add that many people from scientific community, they keep, it's not, I mean, this is not an attack or a critic or something. I just seeing around that lots of people, they are talking about, for example, automatic writing of ChatGPT, depicting a sort of dystopic future where you are writing down the papers. Truth is that ChatGPT is a valid tool, especially for example, rearranging ideas or stuff like this. I think it's a very valuable tool, especially if you are just, you know, tinkering around some concepts and you just want to create, for example, a taxonomy of what you said or what you just wrote down, scribbling along with other people, and that's exactly what you described. I would have another comment related to, I think it's your study. I don't want to mistake baby labs with many babies, but it's the one where I saw this nice world map where it has spots all over the world, actually.
Yeah.
And on one hand, I think that this is an outstanding opportunity to get around the problem of weirdness, and sense that we have participants coming from white, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic countries. So the acronym, I'll put in the chat the acronym. So
yeah, actually, sorry,
yeah.
actually, it has been proposed to move from weird and unweird labels to minority and majority,
Okay,
which we are. No, it's okay. It's just a news that I heard yesterday, and about, sorry.
Okay, so I'll keep in touch with this. Can you put it on the chat? So my point is exactly this. As people working with experimental research, I think you and many of you experienced an approach to scientific experiments based on the environment you find, for example, here in Italy, or for example, US or Australia, or countries like this. And my point is whether you have experiences on working with completely different countries which are set in a very different way with respect to our country. If you, for example, if you have organizational, let's say, if you have implications in how to organize your work, my very first let's say my very first concern would be the time zone, I would say, because we're always thinking about, you know, European time zone and, for example, 6 or 8 hours with respect to the US part of the world, but very few people consider, for example, Central Asia being a time zone to adapt with. If you have comments.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, the problems are many. The first, practical, as you said, because, for example, I found out thanks to the opportunity of participating to this very project, that, for example, in Gambia, the laboratories are very different. And, for example, you cannot test a baby alone without the parents. And also the experimenter usually has to be familiar with the family. So the experimental will change for each participant in that case. And so the uncertainty out there also in this project is a lot, and the noise will be a lot. But the nice thing, I think, is that we declare it and we try to measure it. But yes, as you say, the problems are many, and that's why during the procedure slide in this project, I just write flexibility and try to track all these differences. But also at a conceptual level, there are several problems, because it's like we discover some effects in the Western country, and now we are going to see whether they exist in other countries, right? But some collaborators in this project, especially from Africa and Asia, were like, but we don't care about this effect. I mean, it's not, it's a Western problem. And we have other effects that we care more for political, geographical, and cultural reasons. So, and also from a methodological point of view, so in terms of validity of the measures or validity of the construct, we have a lot of work to do to try to make these multi-lab center studies more adherent with the theory. I don't know if I explained myself well. We give for granted that the effects that we found in our small sample size in Stanford or Berlin or Padova will extend and generalize to the world population. But this is just, an assumption. And so it's very important for us to see whether our results can be generalized and are robust across countries and culture. But maybe the question has a problem at its beginning. I don't know if I explained myself. Maybe we should really, in the case of developmental psychology, we should really rethink the idea of what is development. For example, another example, I'm now working with Nigerian infants in Italy. And I discovered that they start working before our let's say Italian what we study in the manual of developmental psychology. So there is an entire universe of knowledge that we didn't consider so far because we gave for granted that developmental theory based on data from, as you said, rich, educated, democratic families are something universal, but maybe it's not the case. So yeah, but I didn't answer perfectly to your question. So yeah, there are many obstacles in running the same experiment across the different countries for a number of reasons. And so we will see what the data will look like.
Thanks. I think it's very difficult to have an answer to these questions. I think a discussion like this, a very dense discussion like this, it's I think the perfect way to at least have a sort of follow-up of my question. So thanks. I would ask Giorgio if so did you want to ask your question, Giorgio Fumagalli, in video? No problem if you okay. Floor is yours.
So hi, Giulia, thank you very much. I have some previous experience. I have some experience with multicenter studies, and I was wondering, how did you deal with the data sharing outside the European Union, especially with your ethical committee and with all the, let's say, legal aspect of those things? Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very important question. And in my case, specific case, I already started to sharing data according to today's GDPR and the ethical committee approval in a completely anonymized version. So far, in my study, I don't want to know anything about the participants. I already transcript just a code and I don't want to hear anything. And then I share anonymized data, and we know that anonymized data can be shared. The kind of data that I gather are like eye tracking data, so or pupillometric data, and so there's no way are not a trace of the person. It's not like, let's say, fMRI, for example, that some people say that are more a picture of the person or a real tracking of the person. In this case, we have just series of number of fixation or time or pupil dilation that it's impossible to find the person that produced those data. But it is a problem because, in my case, I can do that. I do that also in my single study. But in other country, you cannot do that. And so this will be a limitation at the end of the project. Only the researcher that, for example, would like to start a spin-off, if somebody will be able to access the data, the whole data that will come out. But yeah, not all the ethical committee. As I say, this is very, ethics supposed to be universal, right? It's not like moral. Moral is based on culture, but everybody learned at school that ethics is universal. So maybe we should, maybe the next step will be to create a single ethical committee for the entire world and at least agree on some basic rule on how to do science. But I don't know, maybe I'm dreaming. But thank you for the question. It's crucial. Yeah.
Thank you for your answer.
Other questions? I just remind you that we will have another open discussion session at the end of the next presentation. But if you have other questions for Giulia, please either you type it in the chat or just open your mic and ask the question with no particular. Yes, I just have a comment that I was happy to read in a scientific presentation, the word inclusion many times. This is something that should be, in some sense, introduced in education paths as well. So the fact that there is a value, it's like ethics or stuff like this. So keeping pace with everyone taking part to a project. I would also say that the discussion about contributorship, it's a very interesting one. But maybe we can talk about this later, maybe in light of what we are going to attend right now. So if are there any other questions, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Thanks again, Giulia.
Thank you.
Okay, so Alessandra Dodich works as an associate professor at the Center of Mind and Brain Sciences at the University of Trento, where she leads the Cognition and Neurodegeneration group. She has a background in psychology, a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, and her field of research includes the development and validation of neuropsychological tasks for the assessment of cognitive deficits, also investigating their role as cognitive markers in early and differential diagnosis of neurodegenerative disease and their relationship with the underlying neurodegenerative processes, with a particular interest in social cognition. So, Alessandra, if you want to share the screen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vittorio, for this introduction. Voila, you should see my screen, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I was very happy that Giulia was before me because basically she introduced all the different challenges that we have when we, let's say, started the Signature Initiative. As Giulia, I'm not here to teach anything, but it's nice to share with you what we have done in this year. Actually, the Signature Initiative is a young initiative. We started just 1 year and a half ago. And so, yeah, it's nice to share our experience with us. I'm not sure, actually, I'm sure this is not the best way you can, let's say, carry out a multicentric study, but this is what we have done, and actually we are young, so we are learning by doing. So I have divided my presentation, or I thought about my presentation, divided in three different let's say sections. At the beginning, I will just give you a bit of scientific background of the project, so on which critical issues this project has been born. And then I will describe to you a bit how the initiative is organized. And then I will show you some of the activities within the Signature Initiative, also showing some results. So talking about the scientific background. So the title refers to social cognition, so harmonizing social cognition measures in neurocognitive disorders. So if we have really a look at the literature that is available right now, we see that in the last 20 years we had a boom, so a huge and exponential amount of evidence reporting social cognitive dysfunctions in patients with neurodegenerative disease. So here you see, for example, some of these articles describing deficits in emotional recognition, in frontotemporal dementia, deficits in theory of mind, in Alzheimer's disease, problems in empathy, in Parkinson's disease, and also other let's say, review and meta-analysis underline the fact that these deficits can be present, but also in the early stages of the disease, which is called mild cognitive impairment. So we have an increasing evidence of the fact that social cognition deficits can characterize these kinds of patients. And let's say that for those in the field, when we talk about social cognition dysfunctions and neurodegenerative diseases, the first connection that they have is with the behavioral variant of frontotemporal dementia. So this is a neurodegenerative disorder, as you can see here, characterized by progressive atrophy and also loss of, let's say, functionality in brain regions distributed in the frontal and in the anterior temporal lobes that, as you can see here, are regions that are also part of our, let's say, social brain. So what happens is that if we have a look at the criteria of these patients, these are the clinical criteria proposed by Raskowski in 2011, what we see is that these patients are characterized by early behavioral disinhibition with socially inappropriate behavior. They have diminished response to other people's needs and feelings, diminished social interest, interrelatedness, or personal worth. So these are patients that are characterized by social cognitive, let's say, dysfunctions. But the interesting aspect was that if we look here at the neuropsychological profile, so what can we actually assess during a neuropsychological assessment, a cognitive assessment, we see that these patients are characterized by executive deficits with a relative sparing of memory and visuospatial functions. So here, there is no mention of the fact that this patient can have significant problems in task of social cognitions. And if we have a look at what is written actually in this paper, it is really interesting to see. Let me just move this, sorry. Okay, right here. To see that actually they reported a relevance of this kind of task in the cognitive assessment of these patients, but since these tests were at the time not widespread in clinical practice, they did not incorporate these deficits specifically in the neuropsychological criteria. So this was the picture in 2011. A few years later, we had the new version of the DSM, so the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, the 5th version. And as you can see here, they describe all the cognitive domains that should be assessed in order to characterize, let's say, patients with dementia and also with mild cognitive disorder. And this in terms also of diagnostic
utility. So the neuropsychological assessment should be part of a diagnostic framework in these patients. And here we have, together with the, let's say, the most famous cognitive subdomains, also social cognition. However, it was not clear, and it is not clear actually, if we can in a certain way assess social cognition in clinics in a reliable way. So for example, do we have guidelines? Do we have recommendation based on evidence? And this is important considering the fact that social cognition is really a complex cognitive domain and includes many different subfacets that should be affected. Here you have recognition of emotion, theory of mind, insight, but there's also, for example, empathy, social norm knowledge, moral cognition, and so on. And the other problem is, do we have actually tools that we can use to assess in a reliable way social cognition in the clinical setting? So do we have standardized tasks? Do we have normative data for these tests in different populations? Do we have validated tasks, and so on? So just to give you an idea of the problem, if we search, this has been recently published by Jan van der Stap this year. If we perform a research on Scopus, in this case, using a search key frontotemporal dementia, social cognition, emotions, we have more than 2,600 papers describing deficits in these patients. However, if we want to instead understand which is the ability, for example, social cognitive task in discriminating these patients from healthy controls or these patients from other patient population, we end up with only 14 papers. This is just an example, but to give you an idea of the mismatch between what we have from experimental research and then what we can take from this in order to translate this information into the clinical practice, in the clinical context. So overall, there is this huge mismatch between what we know from the experimental research, from experimental neuropsychology, for example, and what instead we can use in clinics. So this called for new initiatives that took into consideration both aspects. And one initiative is, for example, this one. This project started in 2018, and it was led by Marina Boccardi when she was at the Geneva University Hospitals. So here the aim was to harmonize the neuropsychological assessment in mild neurocognitive disorders, so in mild cognitive impairment for the European centers. And so here we had different working groups, including experts, academic clinicians, non-academic clinicians, and there were 3 different main aims listed here. So first of all, trying to define a consensus in order to define the normal control in order to obtain reliable normative data for the cognitive assessment. Provide guidelines for collaborative studies within the European centers and memory clinics concerning neurocognitive disorders, so both dementia and MCI and mild cognitive impairment, and also defining a battery of tests for the cognitive assessment in these patients. And this actually was adapted by another American initiative, the Uniform Dataset. But the relevance was that in this case, all the different neurocognitive domains described by the DSM-5 were taken into consideration. So together with complex attention, executive function, perceptual motor function, language, learning and memory, we also had social cognition. And this is basically one of the first initiatives which included social cognitive assessment. So the working group dedicated to the definition of the different neuropsychological measures adapted what already available from the American, let's say, experience, and also added a test of social cognition. And the decision here was based on, once again, a consensus, and based on the features of the test. So it was a test easy to use. There was no copyright. It was specifically developed to evaluate social cognitive dysfunction and, let's say, theory of mind deficits in patients with neurodegenerative disease, with cognitive decline. And there was some information about the cutoff scores for the population of interest. Of course, this test shared with other tests for social cognitive assessment some disadvantages. So we still have, let's say, limited information about the psychometric reliability of this test, about the clinical validity, so the ability of this test to, let's say, distinguish patients with actually a deficit in social cognition compared to control or other population of interest. And we still do not have evidence about the differential abilities or different social cognitive tasks, once again, in highlighting social cognitive dysfunctions in these patients. But anyway, they reached a consensus, and so this test was added to the battery. The nice thing was that after this publication, actually a very constructive debate and dialogue started between the expert and research groups working on social cognition and neurodegenerative diseases in Europe and not only. And working together, let's say, we highlighted important critical issues in this field. So first of all, it is, let's say, well known that we have many measures and instruments used in a research context, so for experimental research, but we have a poor translation efforts to move this experimental task to the clinical setting. So we only have a few tests available for the clinical use. And together with this, the other problem is that, as I was mentioning before, social cognition is a complex domain with a lot of different facets that can be affected. And still there is no consensus about which of these subdomains should be assessed in these patients, which are the best task we could use. And so once again, limited information for the clinical assessment in these patients. And overall, the picture that we had in front of us was once again the strong need to put together what we know from experimental research, so from experimental neuropsychology, and what are the needs in clinical neuropsychology in order to guide the optimization of social cognitive tools in clinical setting. And this is actually what we are trying to do with the Signature initiative. So Signature is an acronym for clinical use of social cognition measures for the assessment of neurocognitive disorders. And what we tried to do, first of all, was to involve people from these two words, so experimental neuropsychology, clinical neuropsychology. So we invited both experts, researchers, methodologists, but also physicians, psychologists, and stakeholders. So here we mean patients and also caregivers, so the family members, in order to obtain information about their needs, their point of view. And as aim, so what the Signature initiative have as aim, so first of all, create a consortium, so people that work together, with the aim to first define the state of the art in the use of social cognition measures in memory clinics, evaluating the clinical research priorities for the use of social cognitive tasks in the clinics, also taking into consideration clinicians and stakeholders' needs and perspectives. So together with who and what, we also had to think about how. So we defined a roadmap, actually, of the different steps that we want to reach. So the different outcomes that we wanted to achieve. The first one was the creation of the consortium, so identifying interested clinicians and researchers. And then we wanted to have an idea of the current situation in different countries and centers, because as we were, let's say, mentioning, as Giulia was mentioning in the previous talk, different countries have different rules and way of doing things. So here we wanted to understand the needs, let's say, and the priorities from the clinicians and also the stakeholders in order to describe the state of art in the assessment of social cognition in memory clinics. Moving then to the consortium recommendations about the assessment of social cognition in memory clinics, follow in a later stage, possibly with findings, by another step in which new collaborative projects will be designed in order to answer to the clinical research priorities defined by the consortium. Overall, the aim is to optimize the implementation and the use of social cognitive tasks in a real life scenario. So, talking again about organization, as I was mentioning, the first step was the creation of the consortium. So here you have a picture of our network. The initiative is led by two research groups, one here at CIMEC, the other at IUS in Pavia. And now we are around 140 participants from 18 countries and 90 institutions. Of course, let's say everyone can join if interested in the topic, just writing to us an email and participate to the activity of the consortium. We also ask some experts to participate as advisors. So we have Maxime Bertou from Lille, Jan van der Stok from Belgium, and Fiona Camphor from Australia. They are experts in social cognition in neurodegeneration. But we also ask for the support of Marina Boccardi as methodologist, helping us so in all the different methodological aspects of the project. But you can see here that in different countries we also have phases. These represent our national hubs. So they represent different countries, and they are helping us in disseminating the initiative in their own country and also in data collection. Together with the creation of the consortium, we also create, just to give you some practical information, a website of the initiative with different, you see here, section. There is a first section describing the initiative, social cognition, what is actually the neuropsychological assessment and neuropsychological testing, a page describing the project, with the main aims, an overall description you see here, the main objectives, and the roadmap that I showed you a few slides before, the plan of action here. We have, maybe I can get relevant background. We have a page with all the participants of the consortium that we let's say update when we have new people joining. And then we have a section about measures. So this is a database reporting the available tools. Maybe I can wait, I can do like this. Okay. This is the page of measures. So we listed the available tool for social cognitive assessment for clinical purposes, with the normative data for what we know in different languages and countries, and then we have section for events and social media. Okay, so now just to give you also some results about this initiative. After the creation of the consortium, we move forward. And as I was mentioning before, we were interested in describing the state-of-the-art clinical assessment of social cognition in memory clinics. So the consortium was born in May 2022. Say during the summer, we created the survey and we recruited participants and respondents among clinicians and experts. We collect data till March, and we performed data analysis last spring. The survey was divided in 4 different sections, one specifically dedicated to the background and the commitments of the respondents. The second section instead was focused on the neuropsychological assessment, because we were also interested in understanding if there were significant differences in the cognitive assessment in memory clinics in different countries and centers. And then we focused on social cognition assessment. So first of all, investigating which are where the obstacle in social cognitive assessment in these centers, and for our respondents, which were, let's say, which was the importance and the relevance of assessing social cognition in these patients. And finally, we also asked for some practical information, so the availability of different measures in different centers and countries. So overall, we obtained 430 answers, well balanced between physicians and psychologists. So we were interested in both, let's say, professional figures. And the first question that we asked was, how are neuropsychological measures selected for standard assessment? And here you see a first, let's say, interesting finding. So the majority of our responders answer to this question, let's say, selecting or the use of standard internal protocols, the 50% of our sample, or based on clinical presentation, while only 11% of our responders use evidence-based protocols. So here, once again, we see this mismatch between what we see in literature, so we should use evidence-based neuropsychological protocols, but on the other hand, in the clinical reality, this is true only in the minority of the centers we interview. On the other hand, it was instead nice to see that when we ask how many hours are dedicated to the standard neuropsychological assessment, the majority answer between 1 and 2 hours or more than 2 hours. So let's say there's time for cognitive assessment in memory clinics around Europe. Then we ask specific information about the cognitive assessment and social cognitive assessment. So we ask for both dementia patients and patients with mild neurocognitive disorders, so mild cognitive impairment, if all the cognitive domain described by the DSM-5 were routinely assessed at the baseline evaluation. And here you see the results. Basically, half of our sample answer no to this question. And when we ask, okay, but which are the cognitive domains that you do not routinely assess, we have, for both questions, these answers. So in both cases, approximately 95% of responders do not usually assess social cognition. So the assessment of social cognition in memory clinics, at least those who answer to this survey, is still limited. So of course we ask if there are obstacles that limit the use of social cognitive measures in neurocognitive disorders, and in the 71% of the cases we obtain a yes as response. And the obstacles, the major obstacles that were reported were the limited availability of measures, the lack of guidelines, the insufficient time in clinical setting and insufficient formative events by experts. So when we had a look at this data, what we thought was that, okay, maybe since there are these obstacles and basically half of our sample does not assess social cognition, this domain might be not considered as a relevant domain to be assessed in these patients. But we did not find actually this picture. So when we asked to our responders how relevant is to assess social cognition in different neurodegenerative conditions, and we asked them to rate the relevance from 0 to 100, what we obtained was the average relevance was 92% in the behavioral variant of frontotemporal dementia. And this, let's say, perfectly makes sense because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, these are patients characterized by significant, highly relevant deficits in social cognition. But the relevance was, let's say, rated equal or higher than 70 also from other neurodegenerative conditions, such as primary progressive aphasia, patients that actually are characterized by language problems, even if we have increasing evidence of the fact that they might have social cognitive dysfunctions, atypical Parkinsonism, and also patients with mild cognitive impairments. So the assessment of social cognition is considered relevant also in individuals in the early stages of the disease. And the relevance of social cognitive assessment in these patients was particularly, let's say, underlined by our responders in terms of differential diagnosis and also in the identification of new cognitive phenotypes. Lastly, we ask about some practical information about the most used and known measures to assess social cognitive dysfunctions in these patients. As expected, we found that the most used and known test is a test of basic emotion recognition from faces, the Ekman test. But there are other tests quite famous as the reading the mind in the eye and the FOPA test, which are, let's say, well known and used. If we consider, let's say, our sample altogether, but there are some important heterogeneities when we consider single countries. And so this is something we should take into consideration when we talk about harmonization or optimize the social cognitive assessment in memory clinics, because we can have significant differences about in terms of test availability between countries. So overall, this first activity of the signatory initiatives gave us already a clear picture of the fact that social cognition is still poorly assessed in memory clinics compared to other cognitive domains. There are obstacles. Among these obstacles, we have the lack of validated measures, the lack of time, the lack of guidelines and proper recommendation for the use of this task. But anyway, they are considered relevant in both major and minor cognitive disorders, so for both dementia and patients with mild cognitive impairment, particularly in terms of differential diagnosis. And once again, these results underline the importance of creating this bridge between the research reality, the experimental reality, and then the clinical context. So we are, let's say, right now moving towards the other step of our initiative, so the consortium recommendation. And actually, this is something we have just done. So a couple of weeks ago, we have the first workshop, actually an hybrid workshop in Pavia. So here you see some of the participants, others were connected online.
And here we perform different activities. One was, let's say, once again, an effort to describe the state of the art in social cognitive assessment. So we asked the participant to tell us for which of these social cognitive tasks normative data are available in their own countries. And this is quite an important effort in terms of harmonization, because it gives us a clear picture of which are the tests available in different countries for clinical use. And this is something that will be shared, say, openly on our website, and will be updated when there will be new normative data published. And also it gives us an idea of which are the tests for which an effort is needed in terms of normative data development. So once again, it will help in optimizing social cognitive assessment. Just to give you an example, if we take the results from, let's say, the most recently published studies about social cognitive dysfunctions in the behavioral variant of frontotemporal dementia, we have very nice results on this scale, the self-monitoring scale. But on the other hand, this questionnaire, you can see here, is available for clinical use only in a few countries. So here there's something we must do. And finally, this database gave us a clear picture of which test we can use, for example, to define and to design new multicentric clinical studies. Together with this activity, what we have done in order to obtain a consensus from the consortium was a Delphi procedure. So basically, we invited 22 panelists, including experts in the field, representative of different countries, and also scientific societies. We gave to them the results of the clinical survey together with information and evidence based on literature, and we asked them to answer to specific questions related to social cognitive assessment. We had different aims. I will show them in a minute, using a Delphi procedures. For those who don't know the Delphi procedure, basically you ask some question based to the panelist. Okay, the panelists have to answer based on literature review and also based on the clinical survey results. And then you can analyze the answers of the panelists if they agreed. So in this case, we had a cutoff of 70% of agreement. So if they agree on the question, we have a consensus. So this represents a recommendation from the consortium. On the other hand, if there's a dissensus, so if the panelists do not agree on the specific question, there is a rediscussion of the results and then a second round of Delphi. And once again, if there's a consensus there, we have a recommendation. If not, there is a rediscussion and so on. So in our case, the Delphi aims were overall to develop recommendation for the use of social cognitive testing. And we had 4 specific aims: when and to whom use social cognitive neuropsychological testing in memory clinics, which social cognitive tests should be recommended for the use of memory clinic, which are the obstacles and facilitator for the use of this task, and which aspects should be prioritized in social cognitive testing. For example, should we develop digital tools, remote assessment for this patient, just to give you an idea. So actually, the results of the Delphi are still in progress, and we plan to present our results in the next Global Neuropsychology Congress, but so work in progress. But it's nice to say that when we created this roadmap, for us, it wasn't so clear how useful actually this is, because it allows us to, check what we have done,
the outcomes that we have achieved and what instead it's still to be done. And in this sense, our next activities will be to derive stakeholder-driven recommendation, and this also through the support of different patient societies. So overall, let's say the idea here is that the signature initiative is a multicentric initiative and an open initiative. I, of course, acknowledge all the signature team, but also the advisor who proactively collaborate to this project, and also all the national apps, because without them, basically, this project would not be possible. As I mentioned at the beginning, this initiative is something young. We have just started, and it's true that it's learning by doing. I think that for us, what we have learned so far, the first thing is to have a team, to have advisor who can also help you to solve and to take other perspective. Search for fundings. This is something, of course, helpful in say going on with the activities. And also do not give up if some goals or different tasks are useful to be reached, because step by step, you move on. And the hope here is to arrive to our final target. Okay, so this was all, and I would happy to answer to the question or discuss together relevant aspects.
Thank you, Alessandra. So
Stop sharing so I can see you.
yes, here we are. So you have a specific question for Alessandra. You can either just open your mic and ask the question, or type it in the chat. We can read it. I just have a curiosity. So the as I understood, you did a survey with many participants. So I don't know if I missed the passage, but was it translated in local languages, or it was?
Yeah, this was an activity we asked, and we did together with the national apps. So we asked them to translate the survey in different languages, and there we had some problems. For example, but really, actually in basic questions. First of all, education. So there are different educational, say, levels now across countries, and so it was difficult there to find a common way to classify educational levels across countries. And the other problem was the questions about the organization of the clinical activities, because we have completely different realities. For example, in Italy, memory clinics, the majority of physicians are neurologists. So this is not the same in Germany. In Germany, there are a lot of geriatricians, of psychiatrists working there. So this was a bit of a challenge, trying to adapt the questions in order to be, let's say, understandable and, say, yeah, in different countries. This was a major, not a major, but something to take into consideration. Yeah. And maybe I can add something. I didn't have a slide about that, but since we talk about publication, Giulia was mentioning publication. So for example, in our cases, when we did a kickoff meeting at the beginning, describing the roadmap to the members of the consortium, and also the aims, the activity, our plan. And there we, let's say, we also described the fact that from those activities, we would like to have 3 outcomes, and then the authorship will be defined based on the contribution of each person. So if someone contributes in a significant way, there will be the individual authorship. If not, it will be considered within the consortium as group authorship. So this is something that we did at the beginning.
This is really interesting. I mean, it's we have like a dedicated, let's say, item in our further discussion later on. I would also, because I would read a nice comment by Daria. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If not, sorry about this. But the message reads, it's so hard to produce any questions because part of this presentation are about quite fascinating issues, and you need time to process the info. And that's true. There was lots of info, and the questions I have are just curiosities. I mean, it's hard to digest such a novel topic as well. Another issue which I find fascinating is the fact that, as you were mentioning, you were trying to collate many different expertises and backgrounds, and let's say for people with clinical background, does this mean that you have, let's say, to kind of like change a little bit your point of view? Because I think clinicians, they have, for example, the pact with the patient, sort of like pact with society. Society will trust in them for a very fundamental issue, and so on and so forth. So do you have to think about collating different purposes in building the questions for different people, or you just try to stick to a generic theme and topics, and then maybe differences would arise, but maybe they were not significant?
Well, you mean in the survey?
Yeah.
Well, there we tried as far as possible to create questions clear, without ambiguous term or specific terms related to specific context. So the other thing that we did, we tried to give a glossary in case of problematic terms, for example. This is something we did actually. The majority, I have to say that the majority of our responders anyway are, let's say, academic memory clinics. So they have a certain expertise, also from a research point of view. In fact, we asked, there was no time, but we also asked a question about their commitment in terms of research and clinical practice. And in our sample, the majority of them, around 70%, was involved both in research and clinical activities, while the rest only in clinical activities. So this also, I find it very informative, because, you know, we are not asking to the general memory clinics in which there is no expertise, but we are looking at the results from academic, or let's say in a certain way experts, clinicians, but still we find that social cognition is poorly assessed. So possibly the picture would be more, in a certain way, dramatic if we could assess all the memory clinics in Europe, also those in which there are no experts.
I see the point. Yeah.
You see the point.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, a challenge is actually to put together the researchers' perspective and the clinicians' perspective, because they really have different needs. Just to give you an example, we have nice results from a couple of tests from experimental research. So if you read at the paper, what you think is that, okay, I want to use this task. This task works very well. But then if you ask the clinician, would you use this test? He would ask, no, absolutely not. Too long, too, difficult for a patient with language dysfunction, too difficult to administer this to the family member. So there is really a mismatch between these two realities. And I think it's nice to take both into consideration in order to optimize both aspects.
Yeah. Thanks for this. I think that was the point I was asking. Thanks. So there is a question in the chat by Yannick. I don't know if so if you want to open your mic, you can ask the question yourself, or I can read it. So the message reads: how centralized is the administration of neuropsychological tests in different countries? Are the protocol tests different for every clinic, or is it standardized on a national level?
Usually they're not standardized on a national level, not at all. Let's say that each memory clinic decide which are actually how to proceed is if they want to create a battery of tests that they want to use, or if the neuropsychologist, him or herself, decides which are the most relevant tests to be used for the clinical assessment. Some centers can use, let's say, batteries from evidence-based protocols for example, as the one I show you that was published in the Harmonization initiative led by Marina Boccardi. I think the problem is that if we use the problem is that we use the neuropsychological assessment also to in the diagnostic framework. So in order to have a clear clinical picture of the patient, and the clinical picture drive in a certain way our clinical diagnosis, then we can ask, of course, for biomarkers, so we can evaluate if these patients have, for example, neurodegeneration of a specific time, of a specific type, that tell us, okay, this probably is Alzheimer's disease, or this probably is frontotemporal dementia, okay? But we need the clinical picture. And what happens is that if all the different memory clinics use different measures, and not the, in a certain way, best measures we can have, this will create noise in the diagnostic characterizations of these patients. So this is a problem from a diagnostic point of view. And the problem is even bigger if you think that maybe these patients can be included in clinical trials. So just to give you another thought, what happens is that I perform a neuropsychological assessment, a cognitive assessment of a patient using some tests. Based on the results of some tests, with the support of biomarker, I include these patients in a clinical trial, and then I found out that the tests I was using were not appropriate. That's a problem. So that's why we have now new harmonization and optimization initiatives in the neuropsychological assessment, because anyway, the neuropsychological assessment is one of the first exams that we have in the diagnostic framework of these patients. I hope I answered to the questions.
Thanks, Alessandra. Carlo Minussi, if you want, you can.
Yes, thank you, Alessandra. I have a couple of questions. First one is, yeah, I fully agree that it's better to define since the beginning the authorship of any paper, any kind of paper. I was wondering this, did you decide this kind of authorship based on some specific criteria? Did you follow any specific guidelines? And also, do you share every time the new member is actually entering the consortium? Do you share these criteria? Are these criteria written everywhere, anywhere, or?
The criteria that we follow are those defined in the APA guidelines, so the American Association of Psychology, which are not so they're quite broad, let's say like this. They're not really very specific, but we follow those guidelines. When we have a new member, we share with him with her the history of our emails, because we send some updates to the members of the consortium, just one mail per month, not more. And so we send to the new members a link in which they can find all the material or our previous email, and there are also the slides with this information. Then they have to check for all this. Yeah,
but normally probably it's like when you sign something in your for the bank, you sign, you don't check anything. Now, I was wondering about this because normally there are always discussion about authorship and etc. But anyway, and then I have another question. Sorry if you already said this and I missed it because I had a telephone call, another one going on. But anyway, do you share your documents as you produce any document in open repository so anyone can actually check what you are doing? Actually, I mean, this question is also for Giulia. So everyone can check the progress or if there's anything of interest. If anyone that won't eventually they want to check how things are going and stuff like that, do you have a open repository where you share this kind of info?
Giulia, should I start? Okay.
Let's say that this opens also the final part of this workshop, like the open discussion. So feel free to chime in, just whoever wants to answer to this question about the legacy of and all the paperwork of Multicenter project.
Yeah. So as I was mentioning, we have a folder. This is an open folder. We share the link with the new members, and they have access to the information.
I was referring to the whole community, not those that participate to the.
There's the website which is open. So you can you find information there, for example, about the availability of tests, normative data. This is open. For now, actually, this is something related to the workshop. So we are still finalizing, let's say, the data set. Our plan is to share also the results of the survey, so the data set of the survey, in order also the others to perform further analysis. For example, the results on specific countries. This is something we didn't do. So for those are interested in analyzing the current situation in their own country, they can have access to the file with the data.
Yeah, my turn. Thank you for the question. It depends. It varies a bit from project to project, but in general, across all projects, we have Slack channels. Everybody can subscribe to it and ask directly to the authors the status of the project. Yeah, the project also have open science framework repositories with the data and materials, and of course notebook to code notebook to reproduce the analysis. And yeah, basically the two are the channels, and the website for the Many Babies projects. In the website, the status of the project is always updated. So the team leader answer mail. I don't know how they can manage it, but they answer also to undergrad students' mail if they have curiosity or stuff like that. So
okay, but yeah, sorry. One additional information: do you keep sharing data as you collect them, or do you share data when you close a part, a module? I don't know how to define it. A part of it, and you analyze them, and then you share the data, or you share data as you collect them?
the idea, sorry, Alessandra, I go first if it's okay. The idea is to share data as we get them, as we gather them, but it's not always possible for practical reasons. So again, there will be flexibility on that, because not all laboratories will be able to share data. So yeah, it depends. Okay. There are no strict rules on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, for us, we still do not have new data on patients, for example, from different centers. So we have now finished data collection of the survey, so we will upload just the final data set. We do not plan to acquire new data there.
Thank you.
So
I do actually have a question for Alessandra. Thank you for guiding us in the very detail of this project. It was very interesting. And I don't know if you told this information, but the composition of the co-authors are just professionals or professor, or also undergraduate and early career people are involved in this project? Thank you.
There are also early career. Yeah, from actually PhD students, yeah, young researchers, not only professors. So everyone actually who actively contributed is considered as individual author. Yeah.
So it seemed to me that, and this is actually interesting, because multicenter studies, they are like, I consider them as sort of like very like a place where ideas and things just come out, because I didn't really consider this contributorship topic as a central one in this specific situation. Turned out that it is. And my point is that maybe a question from a personal experience, whether people, especially early career researchers, whether are they kind of happy to be part of a huge collaboration project. So whether if it's let's say it's better to have like 5 papers with 200 authors, or 1 or 2 papers with 2 or 3 authors. This is a joke, but I think I made my point for early career researchers.
You should ask the evaluator. I mean, yeah. What can I say? I think that be able to collaborate is a skill that cannot be undervalued like it is so far. So publishing many studies with the same people in the same lab should not be evaluated as a collaborative study. Because of the crisis we are living as, give us this suggestion that the replication should be done across laboratory, not within the same, and starting from, and also that our discipline is interdisciplinary. We should be able to communicate with statisticians and other philosophers and computational scientists and whatever. So, but so far the the guidelines to get funded are other kind of, I mean, prefer other parameters. And so possibly people that work only in open science and collaborative science will kick out from academia soon. That's my idea, at least for the early career part. That's my sad idea.
For example, in our experience, what we this is an idea actually that came up after the workshop we had. So yeah, now Signature is working in just one single path, with different steps. So we will have the plan is to have 3 outcomes, so 3 different published outcomes, and there we will have many authors, because everyone contributed should be listed there. But then, starting from the workshop, we saw so many possibilities, so many issues that should be investigated, that what would be nice also would be to have like working groups, and in that in this sense, so we could have specific groups working on specific aspects, for example, cross-cultural adaptation, normative data comparison, and so on. And in that case, authorship would be in a sort of way different. So all involving those working on that specific, say, topic. So it would be a mix of the two, you know.
Thanks. So are there other aspects that you want to discuss, maybe from the attendance? See, if I go through my notes, I actually so what I wrote down is that these are 2 different, let's say, I think, aspects with respect to social cognition or psychology study, or a clinical one, because as a very first consideration with respect to multicenter studies, I could say that I see them as a way to get around the problem of low numerosity, let's say, especially, I'm saying here, I live in Trentino, it's a very small province, so basically entering consortium, including other places, could be a way to have more patients, for example, on a specific or let's say having a higher numerosity on specific pathology, specific let's say clinical profiles and so on. But so my point is that it's whether these in some way could be inserted as a sort of relevant issue in the and this holds also for psychology or cognitive neuroscience studies as a relevant issue to assess, for example, a clinical lab or a cognitive neuroscience lab in places where you do not really have the actual numerosity. So a way to do science in places where somehow you could not or you are not going to do that kind of study. So if it's a way to introduce several scientific practices in places where it's hard to study specific diseases or aspects of human cognition.
Yeah, this is for sure a relevant point. And this is particularly true when you have some, for example, rare diseases for which you don't have. I mean, if you work with Alzheimer's disease, you have some numbers. If you work instead with frontotemporal dementia, this is less common compared to Alzheimer's disease. So if you, let's say, put different labs together, you will increase your numbers, and this is for sure something good. In our roadmap, we added the let's say the development of new studies on these patients in a later stage, anyway, compared to, for example, the description of the state of art and the current status of social cognition, because social cognition has some critical aspects. For example, variability in terms of cultural effects. So if you perform a test of social cognition here in Italy, it's not so, let's say, obvious the fact that you will find the same results in another country. So, for example, you will need some adaptation of the stimuli, who knows? So the first step really was to see where we are right now, which are the tests available, which are the pros and cons of this test. Do we trust them in a certain way based on evidence? Yes, okay, then we move to new studies. But for sure, having a multicentric studies gives you the opportunity to increase the number of patients, and also, let's say, put together different expertise from different labs, and this is precious in a certain way.
Yeah, I would just add that thanks for this. It's like entering or building a multicenter study. It's not just taking a few hubs all over the world and putting together the data. It's a scientific task per se, and that's I think a very let's say a concept which it's like it's a recurring concept all over the open science approaches, like data sharing, code sharing, whatever you can think about related to open science. Sometimes it's just seen as a sort of technical task or administrative task, like the funding agency asked me to share the data. Okay, I'm just putting the data on my Dropbox and check the box, but it's not so. It's like it's a scientific task. So entering a multi-center consortium requires scientific approaches to entering itself. I don't know if Giulia wants to add something.
Yeah, maybe just requoting what I said in the slide, that in a world of heroes, maybe science need workers. So people that don't take for granted also the technical parts, because it's completely overlapping with the theory. If you are not able to replicate your analysis, you cannot support a theory. So the two things are not independent, as we have taught for many years. So yeah, and also the incredible awareness about data. It's this other thing we get with data, that in Latino means given, something that is there and you have just to collect it, but it's not like that, right? We take data, it's not given, and we shape data based on the aim of our analysis. So data and analysis should reflect the theory. They're not separate rooms. So yeah, totally agree. And that's very cool.
I agree. Also say that there is no such a thing as raw data in this sense. So it's okay. So it's 5 p.m. I don't know if other people want to add something to this discussion. Otherwise, just a couple of communications. So should you need a certificate of attendance, please send an email with your request at pinkoven.cimek@unitm.it. In early November, So date is to be confirmed, but the first week of November, there will be the third and last iteration of Tinkoff and Rovereto Symposium for 2023. And the title and the topic will be Successful Stories of Data Reuse. So it's something similar to what we discussed today, but we will talk about people that basically took data from other places, thought about a secondary use, and did something with that. I think I could say again thanks to our speakers, Giulia and Alessandra, and to all the people who attended today this workshop. Thanks again, and see you next time.
Thank you, Dario.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.